thing we did is we went to the Magic Kingdom. Right? Disney World. And all those different parks that are now associated with Disney World, and the Magic Kingdom kind of says it all, right? And they still have that, of course, the wonderful castle that's right in the center, and all the park kind of revolves around it, everything splits away from it. And depending on what's going on in the park, you can or can't have access to the castle. But in the center of the castle is this sort of, I don't know what to call it, a factory for princes and princesses. It's the place where if you have a child who wants to be made up into a prince or a princess, you take them into this sort of factory area, and the hair is done, and the makeup is on, and the guys get swords and shields, and if people want to dress as princesses, you have a plethora of Disney princesses to choose from, right? Gazillion. And in the midst of kind of walking around the park, I got a call from my oldest brother, and I told him where we were. And here we are in the midst of Disneyland and the Magic Kingdom. And he started to do, actually it was very kind of, very empowering to women critique of, just turning women into girls into princesses. Why would you go to such a place? Why would you do that? Women are much more. They can choose to be princes. They can do all kinds of things. And I said, yes, we can. And we can dress up like princesses. We can do all of those things. And princes can do anything they want, and they can dress like princesses if they want to do it. So, it's what is the imagery about? What is going on there? At the best of it. It's fun to watch the kids choose who they want to be, what they most identify with, which prince or which princess. And I saw right now more Elsas than you could shake a stick at. Everywhere I turned, there were midget Elsas everywhere. Little blue snowflake dresses, all those things. So Elsa's very popular, and I believe that's an accident. She is probably one of the most empowered princesses Disney's ever made. In fact, she's so empowered that right-wing conservative Christians thought she must be a lesbian. They were doing movie reviews about how horrible it was that she didn't need a man. That she wasn't rescued by the prince. The prince actually ended up being a bad guy. Right? The prince that kind of courts her sister is this total schmuck. Just after the money and the wealth of the kingdom. And actually he's the one who goes to jail. And it's the two sisters that actually, it's their kingdom to run. Right? And Elsa's kingdom to run. So we're doing something very important in our culture. And in Western culture, we get slammed a lot by that other cultures and nations that don't see that empowerment of women as a good thing. And even get slammed within our own culture and nation, don't see that as a good thing. But C.S. Lewis, at a time long before all of this, writes a children's story that empowers girls and boys exactly equally. And he writes this wonderful series of journeys in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and all that series, which is an allegorical tale in all the books, and intended to be allegorical to the Christian story. It's no accident that Absalom, the lion? Aslan, thank you. That Aslan the lion, it represents Christ in this tale. And he recognizes the children who come through the wardrobes as princesses and princes. This empowerment of them, recognition of a royal nature. And he sees them as responsible for sharing in his reign in this kingdom. So now check out our stories today and how much of the symbol-rich motifs that are in it center around this idea of a shepherd and sheep. It's not necessarily what we think of, or even the Roman Empire would think of at the time, as the images of king and people. They're much more into the whole pageantry. And as was the hierarchy within the temple system of the Hebrew people, very much into the pageantry of them, with special wardrobes and breastplates and the whole 9 yards for the high priest. And here comes Jesus along, and he's really challenging all those hierarchical ideas, which are essentially not about equality of people. If anything, those ideas about the subjugation and oppression of people at the cost of the people who are conquered. The Roman Empire is representing that at this point, and the Hebrew hierarchy, which had come in collusion with them. So this image that he brings to the early church of a leadership that is still understood as a kingship actually predates a lot of the Roman ideas of empire, and is the basis for where some of the earliest understandings of kingship in Judaism came from. It goes way back to this sense, even into the ancient Greeks, and that culture influenced the area. So they would have been literate in the symbolism of an ancient Greek's tales of myths, which would take you a long time to tell you all about, but trust me, there is a long tenure of tales about one who is supposed to go and capture a very precious particular kind of sheep or goat with a golden fleece, and the golden fleece becomes associated with ancient lineages of kings and those rulers on earth. So that's in the background of early Hebrew people. They're getting exposed to this as they come into the area and hearing this. And they have their own. David, King David, is a shepherd before he is king, right? And one of the things that impresses God as he speaks to the prophets is how well David is taking care of his sheep. He's leading them to the right places. He's even singing to them. He's making sure they get the best food. He's protecting them with his body against wolves and other people. And just general care. And he says, well, if he takes care of sheep that well, then he can take care of people. And he is selected out. Now this image of a shepherd with a lamb on his shoulders becomes very much associated with King David and is transformed into slightly different understandings in the early Christian church to apply to Jesus. If you go down into the catacombs of Rome, to the first century burial niches of early Christians, there is a sense of their understanding of Jesus and their journey into the kingdom of heaven after they die as being Jesus the shepherd will find their souls represented by the lamb on his shoulders and bear that lamb, that soul, into the next life. That's one of the readings of it. But it's also hiding in its symbolism an acknowledgement that Jesus is in the line of David and King of Kings, the king that they recognize because of the association back to David. So during a time of great oppression, the primary symbol for Christianity and Christians is the shepherd bearing the sheep. Another interpretation that goes along with all of that is also to recognize Christ as the sheep that is being born by the shepherds that we are asked to be as the Christian kingdom. Having been baptized into his life and death, we are baptized both into his sacrificial nature and into his nature as a shepherd. Because both of those things are two sides of the coin that is the new understanding of leadership. One that is to be willing to sacrifice self on behalf of others in all the ways it is to do that with our life, energy, and talents, and skills, and attention. And the other is then to be the shepherd, that again is feeding the people. Notice how in this vision we have in Matthew, that what Jesus is using as food for the people, he's feeding them with justice. Feeding them with hunger for justice, most of all. And that we are to take from that, and the early church did, that we're challenging any notion around us in empire thinking which abuses the people, in which those who want much and have much make their empire. He wants to feed those people with justice, making them have the experience of a life of worthiness and nobility, equal nobility among people. That was such a radical understanding at the time that it was very threatening and was seen as part of an insurrection movement challenging the empire of Rome. We are meant to take up a legacy of shepherds bearing souls, to create a place where all people are fed with justice, and to lead people to that place, to lead ourselves to that place, if we are hungry for justice. This kind of nobility was represented symbolically in the early forms of the church. Tertullian starts talking about this symbol even back into the early 200s, associated with the early church. And it's the symbol called the pallium. P-A-L-L-I-U-M, for those of you who want to Google that on your smartphones. The pallium is this interesting little scarf that's made out, looks like a scarf now, but it's almost a collar with a long piece in the front and a long piece down the back. It can look like that. It can also take on the shape of a Y and then go down the back. But it's meant to refer to a particular robe that was made of the first shearing of a lamb. The first time the lamb is ever shorn, it has the softest wool possible. And in ancient Israel, the shearing of sheep was a highly celebratory ritual. It was like the bacchanalia of Hebrew life. Really, the people would come together and have drink, and they would forgive debts, and other debts would be repaid, wrongs would be forgiven, and the shearing of these lambs for the first time, that wool would go specifically to create the garments for the high priests. And those garments were made in a special way on a loom in which they were all woven as one piece of wool. If you can imagine this on a loom, they start out from the base of the robe, work their way up until they get to the arms, and now they have to broaden out the weaving so they can make arms, and they're leaving a hole for the head in the midst of that. And then they continue on with the back of the robe. Now think about that image. What's it look like? It's a cross. You have the wide center cross piece for the arms. Then when you fold this whole thing over, you're only making one seam to sew it all together. Now check it out. Jesus is identified as wearing various levels and layers of garments at the time of his crucifixion. He has on a regular street robe that some people say is scarlet, but I think that might be allegorical, but he would have worn an outside robe, and then he would have had like a thing going across for it, good to use as a hood in case you're in a sandstorm. But under that, he would have had a single garment. He would have been wearing something underneath. And in his case, he had on, apparently, one of these palliums, because it's noted in all four Gospels that he's wearing a robe that has only one seam. Therefore, if he's wearing a garment associated with the high priesthood, that's an acknowledgement somehow among his people that that's the role they're giving him and recognizing in him. But notice how he's wearing it not on the outside, as a temple priest would, but it's hidden. It's underneath. His true identity is hidden. And when it's removed from him, right before his crucifixion, that is understood and interpreted by the early church as the shearing of the lamb and the pallium removed. So they see all this imagery of the sheep that's going to be sacrificed, the perfect lamb, the unblemished sacrifice of a half of the world, that is also the high priest of the church, and is also the shepherd of the church, and is also willing to be a follower of God, in whom he abides. All of those notions are packed into this beautiful imagery of the pallium. So I thought about coming and bringing all of you like cardboard crowns from Burger King. Because I want you to understand the inheritance you have that C.S. Lewis is talking about. But then I realized that the better image to bring to you from the early church is this pallium. You see it now in our chasuble. We have other chasubles that have the Y shape of the pallium also on the back. So next time you see me wearing various ones of these, check out that the pallium is round like this and the pallium is like a Y. In both cases, the pallium represents the cross of Christ. So there's symbol richness that tells us so much about how we are to understand the nature of God and the nature of the royalty in which we have been baptized. We are meant to understand that our royal nature is very much connected to the cross. That on this day, when we celebrate Christ the King, this is why we have different colors today. Instead of the green we've been using, we have the royal colors shot through with gold thread that are associated quite specifically with Christ's kingship. It's the last day of our liturgical year today, kind of our New Year's Eve today. Because, and we should be rejoicing, like the Pallium Festival, about that. That the sheep is shorn and will be sacrificed. Because that's the route through which this new kingdom is achieved. And then, right away, we get First Advent. Next weekend, oh my gosh, Christmas is coming. And that's the beginning of our new liturgical year. The culmination of our life journey is really to live into this whole sense of being not just those who are meant to help create the kingdom of God, but as C.S. Lewis has taught children, to understand that we are meant to be part of its royal nature. So I invite you, as you are getting ready, even here this Thanksgiving, and suddenly when that's over, we're entering into the season of Advent and preparing for Christmas, to think about what gifts has God given you by which you would feed the people with justice and bring justice to the world and to your own life. Because that King is coming again in a whole new cycle, and your life is just beginning. In Christ's name.